Hey guys, tonight we tiptoe through the silver pine, needle silence of ancient Greece. Not the noisy, Zeus hurling thunderbolts kind, but the soft, midnight version. Imagine a forest frozen in moonlight, where the air smells like damp moss and ancient pine, and every crackle of underbrush might be a deer or a demigod. You're barefoot, because of course you are, and following someone who moves like the breeze itself, Artemis, goddess of the hunt, the moon, and, as tonight's tale will reveal, accidental inventor of the camping trip. But heads up, you probably won't survive this story. That's just Greek myth math. If you're mortal and you see a god in the woods, your options are turn into a tree or spontaneously combust from all. Still, that's future use problem. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the deep woods of Delos, where moonbeams stream through the canopy like spilled milk. Artemis is already there? Has always been there? Her silver bow slung across her back, her tunic barely brushing her knees, her gaze fixed somewhere just past the horizon. She was born for this. Not metaphorically. Literally, she was born in a grove, no palace, no cradle, just bark and birdsong. Her mother, Leto, gave birth to her beneath a date tree after fleeing the wrath of Hera, Zeus's eternally betrayed wife. And right after Artemis arrived, no infant cries, just instant goddess mode, she helped deliver her twin brother Apollo. Yes, your first hour of existence includes midwifing your own sibling. Welcome to divine girlhood. Unlike Apollo, who bursts with golden light, sun-soaked confidence, and poetic thirst traps, Artemis glides through shadows. She doesn't need to be seen to be known. As a child, while Apollo practiced lyre solos on imaginary audiences, Artemis was sneaking into mountain groves to talk to owls. Historians still argue whether she hated cities or simply didn't understand the concept of plumbing. She's the kid who refused to sit at the grown-up table. When other gods bragged about their temples and armies, she asked for one wish: to never grow up. That's not poetic license. That was literally her request to Zeus. No marriage, no children, no tiaras. Just eternal girlhood, wild and sharp-edged. And because Zeus is a sucker for his daughters, she got it. That, and a silver bow, 50 nymph companions, and permission to roam any forest she pleased. Somewhere in Olympus, Athena, goddess of wisdom, probably slow, clapped. So there you are, trailing Artemis as she pads through the brush. Her deer skin sandals make no sound. She gestures for you to follow, and when you try to whisper, "Where are we going?" she just smirks. That's the thing about Artemis. She rarely answers, but always expects you to keep up. Tonight's target isn't prey, it's peace. She moves for the sheer pleasure of motion, leaping brooks, weaving through trunks, pausing only when the wind shifts. Around her neck hangs a charm shaped like a crescent moon. It pulses faintly, like a heartbeat, or maybe your imagination. The forest seems to breathe with her, trees leaning just slightly in her direction. Occasionally, she kneels to inspect tracks, some real, some less so. Once, she finds a footprint shaped like a goat's hoof but 3 times larger. You don't ask questions. You just remember not to camp near any stone circles. At a clearing, Artemis stops. The moon is high now, spotlighting a ring of rocks she arranges effortlessly into a fire pit. She doesn't need flint. The fire just obeys her fingers. She doesn't roast marshmallows. Those haven't been invented. But she skewers something leaf-wrapped and fragrant. You bite into it. It tastes like honeyed fig and slightly smug vegetarianism. This is her element. Not Olympus, not temples, but wild, sleeping earth. You notice she never touches the trees without permission. She taps a trunk, waits, then ties a rope between 2 pines. A hammock. It sways gently as she lies back, arms behind her head, eyes open to the stars. She says nothing. Neither do you. The forest is her temple, and tonight you're in the front pew. Somewhere in this stillness, a night bird calls, low and warbling. Artemis answers with a whistle, identical in pitch. It's not mimicry. It's language. One of the nymphs returns the call, then another. They arrive in ones and twos, flitting between trunks, their laughter half wind, half water. They settle around the fire like moths, sharing bread, braiding each other's hair, debating whether bears or satyrs snore louder. A popular fringe theory is that satyrs don't sleep. They just pretend to so they can overhear gossip. Artemis raises an eyebrow, but doesn't contradict it. Then someone dares to ask, "Do you ever miss Olympus?" She doesn't blink, only the silence between Hera's tantrums. There's a soft ripple of laughter. The fire crackles. One of the nymphs starts a game involving pine cones and truth, telling, "You decline to play. You have too many truths and not enough pine cones." Eventually, the fire dies down. Most of the nymphs curl into cloaks or mossy beds. You stay awake, watching Artemis watch the stars. She traces constellations like old scars, Orion's belt, the Pleiades, Cassiopeia, the drama queen. You wonder aloud, why the moon? She doesn't look at you. Just says, because it never stays. Later, as your eyes grow heavy and the woods begin to blur, she hums a melody. It has no words. It's older than words. Maybe it's the song the earth sang the first time it was lonely. Maybe it's just something she made up to fill the space between moonrise and dawn. You don't ask. You sleep. You wake with dew on your lashes and the faint memory of Artemis's song still echoing in your bones. The sky is pale, that hushed lavender color that happens just before the birds lose their chill and start yelling about worms. You stretch, vaguely aware that your back isn't a fan of moss pillows. Nearby, Artemis is already up, braiding her hair with tiny sprigs of thyme and inspecting animal tracks like they personally insulted her. You follow her into the underbrush, because saying no to Artemis feels like declining gravity. She's the kind of person who doesn't need to explain herself, because even her silence has an agenda. Today the sun's not even over the hills, and she's already got that "let's go ruin someone's ego" energy. Must be a sibling thing. Enter Apollo. You don't see him, you hear him first. Harp strings, warm laughter, a voice like a motivational podcast, but somehow louder. Then the light changes, sharper, smugger, and boom, there he is. Gleaming in gold, leaning against a laurel tree like it owes him rent. "Morning, sister," he says, like he invented the concept. Artemis doesn't even look up, still losing archery contests in your dreams. You brace yourself. This is not sibling rivalry. This is divine banter with a body count, and it's been going on since they could toddle. Historians still argue whether they ever truly got along or were just really good at not murdering each other in public. Apollo, to his credit, he tries to keep it light. He summons a sunbeam, just a casual flex, and shapes it into a bird. It flaps awkwardly. Artemis yawns. Then, without breaking eye contact, she notches an arrow, fires, and pins the light bird to a tree. It explodes into confetti. Point Moon Girl. You learn that their childhood was less playroom, more divine obstacle course. Apollo got all the shiny perks god of music, prophecy, healing. Basically, if it required applause, Apollo signed up. Artemis, she requested forests, solitude, and, perhaps most famously, eternal virginity. Not just not dating, virginity, like mythical, weaponized. Touch me, and I turn you into something with hooves. Virginity. When she made that wish to Zeus, he raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" he asked, with the wary tone of a father whose daughter just asked for a crossbow for her birthday. Artemis was sure. She wanted freedom, real, unshackled freedom. No Olympus tea parties, no marriage politics, no awkward small talk with immortals who didn't know what a tree was. Just moonlight, wildness, and a pack of ride, or die forest girls. Zeus caved, probably because she stared at him until his ambrosia curdled, and thus began her reign as the goddess of the hunt, midwives, and rejecting patriarchal nonsense before it was cool. You walk beside her now, ducking low, hanging branches as she picks her way through a stream. Apollo trails behind, muttering something about how prophecy is a full-time job, and no one respects it anymore. He tries to tease her. Don't you ever get lonely out here with your tree? Hugger Book Club. Artemis stops. Just for a moment. Better than being worshipped by frat boys who think lyres are just portable guitars. Apollo makes a face. You try not to laugh, but a twig snaps beneath your foot and the sound betrays you. Artemis throws you a look. Not annoyed, just amused, as if you've just been initiated into a joke that spans centuries. The twins part ways at a crossroads, Apollo off to a temple jig, Artemis deeper into the woods. She doesn't say goodbye. Gods rarely do. She just vanishes behind a cedar and is gone. Later that day, you find yourself alone with her crew of nymphs. They're not like her. They giggle, they gossip, they play elaborate games involving pine sap and wild daffodils. One of them, Callisto, teaches you how to make a sling from birch bark. Another, Daphne, warns you about Apollo's crushes. He doesn't take rejection well, she says. Just ask my ankles. That's when you realize these aren't just attendants. They're survivors. Most of them ended up in myths that didn't end well. Trees, stars, rivers. Artemis may protect them, but the stories still come for them. A fringe theory suggests that Artemis isn't running from civilization. She's sheltering those who got burned by it. One night, while everyone else sleeps, you ask her if she ever regrets the wish. The no boys, no love, no human attachments wish. She doesn't answer at first, just pokes at the fire with a stick until the embers dance like fireflies. Finally, she says, "Love makes mortals loud. I prefer quiet." You nod, then quietly add, "But silence gets heavy, doesn't it?" She smiles. Not a real smile, more like the idea of a smile remembered from a dream. Then she stands, slings her bow over her shoulder, and says, "Come on, I know where the owls are nesting." You follow her into the dark, where everything is made of silver and shadow, and even the leaves seem to hush themselves. The night accepts you both. The woods are quieter tonight, like they know something's about to happen. You follow Artemis through a grove of poplars, so tall they nearly scrape the stars. She moves like wind across still water. Silent, swift, a little judgmental. Tonight feels different. Charged, like the forest is holding its breath. She stops at a clearing and turns to you with a look that says, "Prepare yourself." You sit cross-legged in the moss, and she begins to pace. Rare for her. Artemis doesn't usually explain herself, but tonight she's got a story to unload. "So," she says, brushing her fingers along a fern that recoils politely. "Once upon a moonbeam, I asked Zeus for something. Oh boy. It wasn't unusual for gods to ask Zeus for favors. Usually it was dramatic stuff, immortality, revenge, lightning bolts delivered with extra pizzas. But Artemis was a minimalist. She wanted something simpler and weirder. A wish," she says, "one that came with a lifetime supply of rope, pine needles, and deeply uncomfortable sleep." You blink. "You wished for camping?" She smirks. "I wished for independence. Nature gave me the rest." It happened right after her 12th divine birthday, which is roughly 2 centuries in mortal years. She strolled into Zeus's throne room, dodged a flying goblet, Hera again, and made her request: eternal youth, freedom to roam, and a gang of woodland besties. Also a silver bow that never missed and a set of magical arrows that wouldn't kill, unless she felt like it. Zeus raised one majestic eyebrow. "No palace, no throne, not even a chariot." She shrugged. "I want a sleeping roll in some trees." There was a long silence, during which even the fates paused their threads spinning. Then Zeus chuckled and said, "Fine, but don't come crying when you wake up with a beetle in your ear." Spoiler, she did wake up with a beetle in her ear. Once. Now she sleeps in a cedar, lined hammock 30 feet above ground. She's nothing if not adaptive. Historians still argue whether Artemis invented camping out of spite or genuine affection for nature. Some say it was rebellion, others say therapy. Fringe scholars believe it was because the moon makes everything look more photogenic. Anyway, Zeus granted the wish, and Artemis set off with her nymph crew, 50 deep, most of them armed with spears or snacks. Together, they wandered the wilds, pitching hide tents between oak roots, roasting mushrooms over moss-fueled fires, and inventing a primitive version of capture the flag that involved real flags and mild injuries. They didn't sleep. Not really. Gods rest, but they don't dream like mortals. Still, they lay in their woven shelters, listening to crickets, whispering stories, occasionally debating whether stars were actually holes in the sky or just flaming balls of regret. One nymph, Euclea, started writing a forest manual, not on paper but on bark slabs. It included essential tips like never challenge Artemis to a foot race, and don't accept herbal tea from dryads named Myrtle. It wasn't just adventure. There were rules, a new kind of order. You didn't step on saplings. You didn't take more than you needed. You didn't talk during Artemis's sky-watching hours, unless you wanted to get lovingly pelted with pine cones. There's one night Artemis remembers especially well. A storm rolled in while they were hiking across Mount Lycaon. The wind howled, and the rain hit sideways. Nymphs scattered like startled deer. Instead of seeking shelter, Artemis stood on a cliff edge, arms out, as if daring the storm to try her. She didn't flinch when lightning struck the rocks below. She just whispered, "I said I wanted wild, didn't I?" A few nymphs joined her. Some called it foolish. Others called it beautiful. A fringe theory claims the cliff glowed for days afterward, pulsing with leftover divinity. You lean back in the moss now, trying to imagine what it's like to be a god whose wish was this. Not power, not palaces, just a backpack, a moonbeam, and infinite woods to wander. As Artemis pulls a small, dented cup from her satchel, she pours what smells like elderflower water into it and hands it to you. It tastes like starlight filtered through a stream, refreshing, also probably slightly enchanted. Your toes tingle. That's normal. The fire tonight is low and lazy, crackling softly as Artemis sits beside it, sketching constellations in the dirt with a stick. She sighs. Most gods crave followers, temples, statues. I wanted the kind of peace no one can offer, but the forest itself. You ask if she ever gets bored. She considers this only when the nymphs try to make s'mores. Apparently, the earliest versions involved charred olives and fig paste. Historians agree culinary progress took time. Eventually, she gestures upward. That's Selene, she says, pointing to a pale smear across the sky. As she drives the moon chariot, I just walk alongside. You frown. You're the moon goddess, though. She smiles wryly. One of them. It's complicated. Don't tell Hecate? Greek mythology, the original multiverse. Several goddesses share moon duties, depending on the mood, the moon phase, and who's available. Artemis tends to rule the waxing crescent nights, the wild, unformed beginnings. A quiet settles again. You feel the forest fold around you like a quilt. Even the insects seem to buzz more softly now. Artemis leans back, eyes half-lidded. When you're immortal, she murmurs, you don't need new places, just deeper paths. Then she tosses another stick into the fire, and the flames puff upward, sending a spiral of sparks into the sky. Somewhere, an owl hoots, a sound like a slow exhale. You realize, this isn't just a camping trip. It's a philosophy, a sacred refusal, a god's gentle rebellion against the noise of eternity. And it's starting to look a lot like home. The fire's ashes have barely cooled when Artemis decides it's time to move again. No warning, no breakfast, just a quiet command. Pack up. You scramble to roll your moss mat while a nearby nymph sighs theatrically, still chewing on a honey root stalk. Apparently, you're heading for a ridge where the trees thin out and the air gets crisp enough to hurt. This, Artemis declares, is the perfect spot for a proper outing. You think she means a hike. She does not. She means the first ever girls' trip in divine history. Picture it, the goddess of the hunt leading her feral entourage into the wilderness, not to conquer or colonize, but to vibe. No temples, no mortals, no gods barging in with thunderbolts or marriage proposals. Just Artemis, 50 nymphs, a donkey named Bristle, who may or may not be immortal, and a lot of twine. You begin your trek through the thickest part of the forest, where the moss feels like wet velvet and every step makes a gentle squish. The air smells like pine sap and old legends. A nymph named Pitys is in charge of snacks, mostly berries and things that look like berries, but hum if you get too close. You learn very quickly not to touch those. The group travels in a loose, chatty pack. Artemis walks ahead, scanning the trees with a gaze that could cut marble. She's relaxed, which means she's only armed with 2 knives instead of 7. During one pause, she climbs a boulder and points toward a clearing. That's where we're camping. No tents, no bedrolls, no magical folding cabins. Just sky grass and the faint hum of something watching from the tree line. Perfect. The site is gorgeous, admittedly, surrounded by wild rose bushes and shadowed by an ancient oak that leans like it's in on the gossip. The nymphs get to work like pros. Someone conjures a fire with dry cedar bark and a sharp look. Someone else braids vines into makeshift hammocks. Artemis sharpens a stick. For fun. As the sun sets, things start to feel less like a myth and more like a sleepover, hosted by a woodland demigod. There's food. Grilled root vegetables, roasted nuts, and something called Phoenix eggplant that you suspect is neither phoenix nor eggplant. It tastes like smoky ambition. There's also storytelling, not the loud bard kind. These are whispered myths that never made it to mortal ears. One nymph talks about the time they caught a satyr, trying to fake lycanthropy for attention. Another describes a secret glade, where the frogs chant in Latin. Artemis listens, half smiling, one hand stroking Bristle's ear. Bristle has opinions, but doesn't share them. Then come the games, not your average capture the flag. This version involves moonlight camouflage, all calls, and a lot of light bruising. You spend an hour hiding inside a hollow log, only to be discovered by a nymph who smells like lavender and vengeance. After the games, things quiet down. Artemis breaks out the lantern bugs, bioluminescent beetles she trained herself. She releases them into the air, and suddenly the entire clearing glows like a disco ball designed by fairies. It's soft, magical, and absolutely not OSJ approved. One nymph starts humming. Another adds harmony. Soon, they're all singing something low and wordless, like a lullaby carved from tree bark and wind. Artemis doesn't sing. She never sings. But she whistles a harmony, sharp and pure, and the melody shifts to match her mood, proud, calm, wild. Then, a surprise, a gift, giving circle. Artemis insists it's tradition. The rules are simple. You find something in the woods and give it meaning. One nymph offers a spiral shell that echoes laughter. Another presents a pine cone she swears gives you better dreams. When it's Artemis's turn, she pulls a tiny arrow, shaped charm from her pocket, and tosses it to you. For not falling in the river that one time, she says with a shrug, you treasure it immediately. Night deepens. Stars crowd the sky like curious bystanders. The campfire hisses gently as someone tosses in a bundle of herbs. The smoke smells like myrrh and freshly laundered secrets. You lie back on the cool grass, watching the stars swirl above. Artemis is a shadow beside you, eyes closed, face serene. Someone whispers, "What do you think mortals are doing right now?" A nymph answers, probably writing poems about us and mispronouncing our names. You chuckle. They're not wrong. A little later, a heated debate breaks out over who's the best constellation. Artemis rolls her eyes. Orion's just abs. And he still couldn't outrun me. That gets a laugh. Fringe scholars say the Artemis-Orion rivalry was really a cosmic flirtation. Others say she just hated that he talked about himself in the third person. As the last embers fade, Artemis speaks one last time. This is what Olympus doesn't get. You don't need gold statues. Just a place where no one talks over the wind. Then she tucks her head into her arm, curls up like a cat who could vaporize you, and falls asleep. You lie there, not quite asleep, not quite awake, swaddled by grass and myth. In the distance, an owl calls once, then silence, and beneath it all the soft rustle of immortals dreaming. Dawn arrives as a smudge of pink on the horizon, filtered through trees that look like they were sketched by a sleep god. You're already up. Artemis doesn't sleep past the birds, and by default, neither does anyone else. The camp is packed in 10 minutes flat. Nymphs braid their hair while walking. Bristle the donkey is chewing on a scroll he definitely wasn't supposed to find. Artemis just stretches, rolls her neck, and announces, "Time to track the stag." You blink. The what? She doesn't repeat herself. Artemis is a goddess of the hunt, not of explanations. So off you go, into denser woods, your feet slipping on dew, slick roots. The nymphs fall into formation, silent, agile, and maybe just a little dramatic. This isn't any old deer hunt. No, today you're chasing the Cyrenian hind, a beast of such mythic fame. It has more fan pages than Apollo's abs. It's said to be sacred to Artemis herself. A golden horned deer, faster than an arrow in flight, and possibly capable of teleporting when it feels dramatic. Legends say it's untouchable, especially by mortals. But that hasn't stopped heroes from trying. One of them, Heracles, literally got assigned, "Catch this deer," as one of his impossible labors. Spoiler, Artemis was not amused. As you trek deeper, Artemis explains, not in words, but in the way she walks, that this isn't about conquest, it's about reverence. The chase is a ritual, the pursuit a prayer. Catching the stag, optional. Not catching it, expected. And yet, she's definitely going to try. You cross a stream so cold it makes your bones question your life choices. You climb a ridge where the rocks crumble like stale bread. The hind's tracks appear delicate hoofprints in the mud, spaced far apart. This thing's fast and tall, probably smug. Artemis halts suddenly, raises a hand. The forest stills. And then, you see it, a flash of gold between trees, antlers like sunrays. It stares directly at you, not frightened, just curious, like it's been watching you sleep for weeks and has a few notes. Artemis draws her bow. The string hums with tension. You hold your breath. Then, just as she releases, the hind blinks, vanishes, and the arrow thunks into a tree. She doesn't curse. She just lowers the bow and says, "Of course." Historians still argue whether the hind was truly sacred or just really good at dramatic exits. Fringe accounts suggest it was a shapeshifter, or a nature spirit, or a prank-loving manifestation of Artemis's own subconscious. You continue tracking it for hours. The trail twists through glens where the grass glows faintly blue and trees lean together as if gossiping about you. At one point, you find a clearing with hoof prints in a perfect circle, like the hind stopped to practice ballet. Artemis snorts. Off. The nymphs break into soft chatter. Someone shares a theory that the hind only appears to those who don't want to catch it. Another insists the hind once dated a cloud. You stop questioning anything. By late afternoon, you reach a cliffside. Below, a lake glimmers like a spilled mirror. There, at the edge of the water, is the hind. It drinks with its eyes closed, blissfully unaware, or pretending to be. Artemis watches. Doesn't move. "Go ahead," you whisper. She doesn't. Instead, she lets out a sharp whistle, short and low. The hind lifts its head, ears twitching. It stares at her. Then you. Then it turns and vanishes into the lake like it was never there. Artemis finally exhales. "That's enough," she says, wiping her hands on her tunic. Later that night, back at a different camp, someone asks, "Why let it go?" Artemis stares into the fire. Because not everything sacred needs a trophy. Some things just need witnesses. The nymphs nod solemnly, though one is clearly drawing deer memes in the dirt. Bristle snorts. The fire cracks, and you realize this wasn't a failed hunt. It was a pilgrimage. One made in pursuit of something too beautiful, too fast, and too wise to ever belong to anyone. Like Artemis herself, your ankle, deep in mud, and trying to remember the last time you saw a clean tunic when Artemis halts, nose tilted to the wind. Something's off. The forest, usually her co-conspirator in silence, feels tense, like it knows a plot twist is coming. Then you hear it, the rhythmic crunch of leaves, a human gait. Too fast. Too heavy. Artemis's eyes narrow, and that's when you spot him. A hunter, bow in hand, moving through the ferns like he owns the place, which is wild, considering he's just wandered into the sacred bath grove of the most famously Noak boys, allowed deity in the pantheon. This, unfortunately, is Actaeon, a guy whose sense of boundaries is roughly the same as a goat's. Here's the setup. Artemis and her nymphs are in the middle of their ceremonial bath ritual. Moonrise, waterfall, sacred herbs, the usual. You've been warned to stay well out of sight, unless you're into transformative life trauma. But Actaeon, he's chasing a deer. His dogs have scattered. He crashes through the bracken with all the grace of a drunk centaur. And there he is, right at the edge of the grove, peeking through the leaves. He sees Artemis. She sees him. Time stops. Let's pause here to say there are at least 4 versions of what happens next. Historians still argue whether it was an accident, a dare, a misunderstanding, or Actaeon being the ancient Greek equivalent of just asking questions. But Artemis doesn't deal in nuance. She deals in principles. In privacy. She stands, water glistening like silver on her skin, eyes colder than the moon, and raises one wet hand. Actaeon doesn't run. He tries to speak. Too late. With a wordless curse, she transforms him into a stag. Antlers, hooves, the whole package. One moment man. Next moment, grazing mammal with a sudden existential crisis. And then his own hunting dogs find him. They hesitate, just for a second, because something about him smells familiar. Then instinct takes over. He runs. They chase. You can't look away, even though you want to. The nymphs go silent. Artemis watches the trees rustle in the distance, not triumphant, not angry, just very, very still. Later, she breaks the silence. He had a choice, curiosity or respect. He chose wrong. You don't ask questions. That night, the fire is subdued. The nymphs speak in whispers, if at all. One leaves a wreath of herbs near the stream, maybe for protection, maybe as a memorial. And you realize Artemis's world has rules, but they aren't written. They're felt. Woven into the moss, the wind, the water. Break them, and nature doesn't forgive. It recalibrates. There's a fringe theory whispered among mortals that Artemis didn't curse Actaeon. She just showed him who he really was. A creature of impulse, of predation. The transformation wasn't punishment, it was revelation. But tonight, no one's discussing theories. Everyone just keeps close to the fire. The next morning, Artemis says nothing. She just tightens the strap on her bow and begins walking. You follow, silent, thoughtful, wondering if all myths come with a warning label you only see after it's too late. As you walk, a nymph whispers a joke to break the tension. At least he died doing what he loved, violating divine privacy. You snort. It's terrible. It helps. By midday, you reach a ridge overlooking a valley, and Artemis finally speaks. Respect, she says, isn't given because of power. It's earned by presence, by knowing when to step back. You nod. She doesn't see it. She's already gone, fading into the shadows like a deer that knows it's being watched. The mountain air gets thinner with every step, but Artemis doesn't slow down. She's heading toward the highlands of Arcadia, rugged, steep, and deeply interested in making your life easy. The nymphs mutter under their breath, their normally sprightly pace dulled by the altitude. Even Bristle, whose stubbornness is usually unmatched, pauses now, and then to glare at rocks like they owe him rent. But Artemis, she thrives here. This is her second home, the place where clouds settle on the ground and time forgets itself. Up here, the rules are different. Trees grow sideways. Rivers run cold enough to freeze memory. You climb in silence, one foot in front of the other, the path just barely visible between mossy stones. By midday, you reach a narrow ledge overlooking a chasm, so deep it echoes your thoughts back at you. Artemis stops, her face unreadable. Welcome, she says, to the top of nowhere. You collapse onto a boulder, breathing like you've been chased by the concept of cardio itself. Artemis. She just takes in the view. She's home here, among the peaks that bite the sky. Arcadia was always her favorite. While other gods built temples and gathered worshippers, Artemis found solace in the lonely places. No statues here. No gold. Just wind, stone, and the occasional goat with boundary issues. The nymphs begin setting up camp in a sheltered alcove beneath a ridge. One produces a jar of thick honey from somewhere, and it's passed around like sacred nectar. Someone roasts pine nuts. Another attempts to warm water over a very optimistic fire. You huddle close, letting the heat reach your fingers. Then you hear it, laughter. Not nymph laughter. This is coarser, louder. Like tipsy gravel, satyrs. Artemis hears it too. Her jaw tightens. Stay here, she mutters, and melts into the trees. You don't stay. You follow, at a distance, stepping lightly, ducking low. It doesn't take long to find the source. A half-dozen satyrs, dancing around a makeshift bonfire, flutes squealing, hooves pounding the dirt like percussion. They're drunk on pine wine, and one of them is trying to flirt with a rock he mistook for a dryad. Artemis steps into the clearing, quiet as moonlight, but the effect is immediate. The music dies. One satyr chokes on his drink. Another trips over his own leg. All six freeze. She doesn't yell. She doesn't raise her bow. She just looks at them. And somehow, that's worse. Was this grove marked? She asks. They all shake their heads. Did you see my trail signs? Nods. And a brave one stammers. We thought you wouldn't mind being in a good mood after your last hunt. She raises a brow. They scatter. Just gone. The wind fills the space they leave behind. Later, around your own fire, Artemis finally speaks. They always assume silence is an invitation? You sip your honey water and say nothing. There's a long pause before one of the nymphs pipes up. To be fair, that one rock did look flirtatious. Laughter ripples around the circle. Even Artemis smirks. That night, sleep comes slowly. The mountain is too still, too sharp. You lie awake under the stars, wondering how anyone could live like this forever. Above it all, apart, always watching. Artemis is awake too, perched on a boulder just outside the camp. She stares into the sky like she's waiting for it to blink. The moon is a sliver tonight, barely more than a sigh. You approach quietly. Don't you ever get tired? You ask. She doesn't turn. Of what? Being the one who always knows the rules. Enforces them. Lives by them. She's quiet for a long time. Then she says, the world doesn't need more gods shouting. It needs someone who remembers how to listen. You sit beside her, shivering a little from the cold, and the silence between you isn't awkward. It's comfortable. Full. Like a promise. Eventually, you both lie back and watch the stars, listening to the mountain breathe. In the distance, a satyr's flute begins again. Soft this time. Respectful, echoing through the peaks like an apology. Your knee, deep in brush, tangled in some particularly opinionated brambles, when Artemis announces, with no context at all, we're going to a party. You freeze, 1 foot mid-air, completely unprepared for the phrase, party, to leave her mouth. Artemis doesn't do parties. She does meteor showers and existential solitude. But here you are, 2 days later, arriving at the gates of Caledon. A kingdom so proud of its vineyards and boar infestation that it managed to summon half the demigods of Greece for a little get-together they're calling a hunt. You get the feeling that if this had been marketed differently, it would have been a murder-themed wedding. Here's what happened. King Aeneas forgot to honor Artemis during his big harvest festival. Just skipped her entirely. No olive branch. No incense. No complimentary fig pie. Naturally, Artemis responded with mature restraint and unleashed a divine boar to wreck his kingdom. Historians still argue whether it was truly her boar or just a really good cosmic coincidence. Fringe scholars suggest the boar was just hangry and wandered into the wrong fields. Either way, the Caledonian boar became a whole situation. It trampled crops, demolished fences, and treated royal courtyards like a personal mud spa. So the king did what ancient kings do best. He called a bunch of heavily armed people and promised eternal glory to whoever could stop the pickpocalypse. You roll into this chaos beside Artemis, who looks distinctly underwhelmed. She's not here to win anything. She's here to make a point, and maybe side eye some mortals. The hunting party is a who's who of ancient dysfunction. There's Meleager, the handsome prince with mom issues, Atalanta, the huntress faster than gossip, a handful of grumpy uncles who hate that Atalanta's here, and several shirtless guys, named something like Theron, who are mostly here for the snacks. Artemis says nothing but gives Atalanta the briefest nod of approval. You catch it, and so does Atalanta, who stands a little taller afterward. She knows the stakes, she knows the crowd. She also knows that if she kills this boar, she'll be making history and enemies. The hunt begins at dawn. You follow quietly, slightly behind the main group. The forest is tense, and not in a fun way. Branches crack. Dogs bark. Someone's already yelling about losing a sandal. Then, thunder. Not from the sky, from the ground. The boar charges through the underbrush like an avalanche in pig form. Tusks like bronze scythes. Eyes burning with whatever emotion sits between spite and indigestion. It's massive. Like, shouldn't fit in the forest. Massive. Meleager hurls a spear. It misses by a continent. One of the uncles faints on purpose. And then Atalanta moves. She doesn't charge. She glides. Her feet barely touch the ground. With a single motion, she draws her bow and looses an arrow. It strikes the boar in the shoulder, just enough to slow it, to mark her. The crowd gasps. Meleager lights up like a candelabra. "She struck first! She wounded it!" he cries, pointing for all to see. Moments later, he drives a spear through the boar's neck. It dies with a final, apocalyptic squeal. Silence follows, and then chaos. The uncles demand credit. Meleager throws a fit and gifts the boar's hide to Atalanta. The uncles are so offended they start muttering about exile. Artemis, standing apart, rolls her eyes so hard the trees shift slightly. She leans toward you and says, "Mortals always confuse glory with ego." She didn't want a trophy. She wanted truth. Later, you find Atalanta sitting on a fallen log, boar hide at her feet, quietly furious. Artemis approaches her, not as a goddess, but as someone who's been underestimated for eons. "They'll rewrite this," she says softly. "Say you were helped. That you stumbled." Atalanta scoffs. "They already are." Artemis kneels beside her. "Then run faster. Hunt sharper. Be so undeniable that they have to lie bigger." It's the closest thing to encouragement Artemis gives. You leave Caledon at dawn, the scent of roasted boar in the air, and the tension of unresolved myths still hanging over the fields. Artemis doesn't look back. She never does. Back in the forest, she breathes easier. The birds resume singing. Bristle sneezes theatrically. You ask, "Did you really send the boar?" She shrugs. "Let's just say I know a guy." The sun is low, and the forest is warm with the smell of pine and possibility, when Artemis pauses on the trail and mutters, "Time for something quieter." You sigh in relief, assuming this means fewer boars and slightly fewer arrows. You are incorrect. Instead, you're headed to Trozen, a sleepy little coastal town best known for olive oil, breezy seaside gossip, and one very intense teenage boy named Hippolytus. Now, Hippolytus isn't your usual mythological male. For starters, he doesn't throw spears just to impress people. He also doesn't pursue women, which in ancient Greece is basically a revolutionary act. He's devout, solitary, and most importantly, a card-carrying member of the Artemis fan club. You don't know if he has actual membership tokens, but he definitely has her symbol carved into his bedroom furniture. When Artemis arrives in Trozen, she walks through the town without fanfare, and Hippolytus is already at the temple. offering fresh garlands and reciting prayers so eloquent, you start to suspect he rehearses them in the mirror. He turns when she enters, eyes lighting up like someone just told him archery got declared an Olympic sport again. "Lady Artemis," he says, bowing so low it makes your knees ache in sympathy. "You honor us." Artemis nods. "Walk with me." He does, and you trail behind them like a nosy breeze. They wander the cliffs above the sea, discussing virtue and horses, and whether mortals are capable of respecting women without turning it into a complex. You learn quickly that Hippolytus isn't just pious. He's a bit much. He takes Artemis worship to extremes. Like, "I made a vow to reject all romance, because love is distracting and gross." Levels of intensity. Some say he was trying to prove his devotion. Others think he was just scared of getting emotionally involved with anyone who wasn't already divine and emotionally unavailable. Historians still argue whether his celibacy was sincere or performative. Fringe interpretations suggest he had a crush on Artemis and was trying to win her favor via intense platonic vibes. Artemis, for her part, seems amused. She walks beside him, listens, occasionally raises an eyebrow when he says things like, "Desire is a disease." You get the sense she likes his loyalty, but rolls her eyes at his drama. Still, she protects him. And this is where things start to curdle. Enter Aphrodite, the goddess of love, laughter, and giving people extremely inconvenient crushes. She sees Hippolytus swearing off passion, praising Artemis like she's the only goddess in the sky, and Aphrodite is not having it. To her, this isn't just disrespect. It's treason. She decides to teach Hippolytus a lesson, which is always a red flag when divine beings are involved. Her method: she plants an unnatural desire in Phaedra, Hippolytus' stepmother. Yeah, it gets weird fast. Phaedra falls hopelessly in love with him. He predictably freaks out and rebuffs her. She, heartbroken and humiliated, accuses him of seduction. Theseus, Hippolytus' father and full-time king part-time logic failure, believes her and curses his own son. By the time Artemis hears the news, it's too late. Hippolytus is already in a chariot, fleeing the city, heart-pounding, horses wild. A sea monster, maybe sent by Poseidon, maybe just bad luck, rises from the surf, spooks the horses, and flips the whole vehicle. He dies on the shoreline, tangled in reins, blood soaking the sand. You arrive with Artemis moments after. She doesn't scream. She kneels beside him and places her hand over his heart, already still. Her face doesn't change, but the air thickens like the forest is holding its breath in solidarity. She stands and promises revenge. Later, in the temple, she tells Theseus the truth, not kindly. "Your wife lied," she says. "Your son died clean." Then she turns her fury toward Aphrodite. "I can't harm her," Artemis says to you later that night, staring into the embers of a quiet campfire. "But I can curse her pride. Someday, one of her favorites will fall for me, and I will refuse him. It's a cold sort of justice, but it's the only kind gods have left when they play by each other's rules." In a small ritual, under moonlight, Artemis builds a shrine to Hippolytus. She promises his name will live on, honored by those who walk away from the chaos of passion and seek quiet purpose instead. You ask, "Did you love him?" She doesn't answer right away. Then she says, "I respected him." And from Artemis, that's louder than love. The air shifts the moment you descend into Delphi, not the temperature. Though it's warmer here, the stone's sun, baked and humming, but something else. A tension, a hum behind your ribs, like the whole place is tuned to a frequency you can't quite hear. You glance at Artemis. Her jaw is tight. That means only one thing. Apollo is nearby. Delphi is his turf, the oracle's home. The world's most passive, aggressive information kiosk. Apollo claims it with all the subtlety of a solar flare. He's already waiting at the temple steps when you arrive, lounging in golden robes, lyre in hand, a smug halo of self-satisfaction practically visible. The nymphs keep their distance. Even Bristleside eyes him. "Sister," Apollo greets, standing to kiss the air near her cheek. You've come to bask in enlightenment. Artemis responds with a blink so flat it could iron linen. I came to stop you from meddling. You freeze. This sounds like the start of a divine sibling spat with mortal casualties. Turns out there's a prophecy. A vague one, as usual. Something about a young man, a sacred river, and a love that leads to loss. Apollo interpreted it with his usual flair for unnecessary plot twists, and decided Artemis should meet a handsome mortal named Arethas, or maybe Admetus. You lose track. He changes the name halfway through. Artemis frowns. Why would I want to fall in love? Apollo shrugs. Why not? You've played the untouchable moon maiden long enough. Try humanity. It's fun until it isn't. Historians still argue whether Apollo genuinely believed this love match was a good idea, or whether he was trying to challenge Artemis's entire worldview because he was bored. Artemis, being Artemis, says nothing. She leaves. But you don't. You stay behind, listening to Apollo strum his lyre and talk about fate like it's a mixtape he made himself. He tells you about Orion and the prophecy and how some lessons can only be learned the hard way. That night, Artemis is quieter than usual. You camp near a river, moonlight dancing on the water's surface like it knows secrets you don't. She sharpens her arrows methodically, one by one, the rasp of stone on metal the only sound. Eventually, she speaks. He thinks I'm lonely. You wait, I'm not. More silence. Just tired of being told I should be. You consider asking about the boy Apollo mentioned. You don't. She wouldn't answer, and besides, it's already started, this slow drift towards something else. A hinge moment in a myth that hasn't been written yet. A few nights later, she finds him. A hunter, Orion. Tall, quiet, strong enough to wrestle bears and polite enough not to brag about it. He greets Artemis without awe. Just a nod. You're fast, he says after watching her shoot 3 arrows through the same knot in a tree. You're slow, she replies. He laughs. And somehow, that's the beginning. They travel together. Just a few days. Hunt a little. Talk even less. He doesn't press her. Doesn't posture. He listens when she speaks. Doesn't flinch when she doesn't. You don't know if it's love or the absence of all the things she's used to rejecting. But she lets him walk beside her. That alone is seismic. The nymphs whisper. Some are charmed, others suspicious. Artemis ignores them all. One night, she and Orion race through a meadow under starlight. He keeps up. Barely. When they stop breathless, she laughs. A full, real laugh. It's so rare that the grass seems to lean in just to hear it. Later, as she sleeps under the open sky, you ask a nymph what she thinks. I think. The nymph says slowly, won't last, because he's mortal. Because he's too real. That hits different. The next day, Apollo shows up. He doesn't say a word about love or fate or prophecies. He just greets Artemis with a smile too wide and a story too rehearsed about a swimmer out at sea, daring her to shoot. She doesn't know it's Orion. Not yet, but she draws her bow, and the arrow flies. The arrow slices the sky, clean and silver, a streak of moonlight launched from the quiet fury of Artemis's bow. It arcs over the waves, perfect in its path. Too perfect. You don't breathe. Out at sea, a speck dips beneath the surface. There's a moment, just a flicker, where everything holds still, the birds, the wind, even bristle mid-chew. Then Artemis's posture changes. Not a word. Just a shift. The kind of movement that says, I've just done something irreversible. She turns to Apollo, whose face is already halfway between smug and solemn. What did I just hit? She asks. He doesn't answer. Which is answer enough. She walks away. No storm follows her. No divine outburst. She just vanishes into the trees, and for once, the forest doesn't sing. The nymphs scatter. You stand there on the sand, watching the sea lap quietly against the shore, like it hasn't just swallowed a myth. Hours pass. Eventually, Artemis returns. Her hair is wet, her tunic salt-streaked, her hands shaking. She doesn't say his name. She doesn't have to. The tide already carried the rest of him away. So here's the thing, depending on who you ask, Orion died for very different reasons. Some say he tried to hurt one of the nymphs, and Artemis struck him down in defense. Others say he got too cocky and challenged the gods. A few blame Gaia, who supposedly sent a giant scorpion to avenge the animals Orion hunted too gleefully. Historians still argue which version is true. A growing minority say Apollo orchestrated the whole thing, afraid Artemis might choose something outside his golden control. What's certain is this: Artemis placed Orion's image in the stars, not as a warning, as a memory. You see it that night, the great hunter, his belt of stars cutting across the sky. She doesn't speak about it, but when the moon rises, she stares at it like it owes her a better ending. Back at camp, the atmosphere is brittle. No laughter, no pine cone games, just silence wrapped around the nymphs like fog. One of them hums a lullaby Orion once whistled. Another adds words, "He ran with the moon da, and slept with the sea da, and never looked back except once for me." Artemis listens, and for the first time in this journey, her eyes glisten. Later, you find her alone, high on a ridge where the air tastes like thunder. She's carving something into the bark of a tree. An O, followed by the trailing line of an R. She stops before she finishes. You sit beside her. She doesn't look at you, just says, "He never asked for anything." You nod. She adds, "Maybe that's why I let him stay?" The moon above flickers behind a cloud. The stars shiver. Somewhere in the vast sky, Orion glows on, silent and unreachable. And Artemis, she doesn't cry. She never cries, but she walks a little slower when you leave the ridge. You don't mention it. That night, she tells Bristle a bedtime story about a boy who outran the gods and got turned into a legend because someone missed him too loudly. The donkey brays softly, the fire dies low, and for once, Artemis sleeps the whole night through. The sky is bruised with morning when Artemis wakes, eyes dry, face calm, but you can feel the difference. Something in her has locked up tight, like a door sealed behind an iron moon. The camp is already stirring, nymphs pretending not to glance her way, Bristle chewing with exaggerated innocence. You follow her without a word. She doesn't say where you're going, but you sense it's not the kind of journey that ends with roasted chestnuts and a pinecone toss. Her stride is brisk, decisive, and by mid-morning, you've crossed into unfamiliar woods where the trees wear ivy like mourning veils. Artemis finally stops at a clearing. The air smells strange. Damp soil, old battles, something electric. She lifts her chin and whispers, "Scorpio." You barely hear it. Then the ground shifts. A fissure cracks open in the clearing, and from it slithers something huge, silent, and lethal. A scorpion the size of a wagon, its carapace shimmering like obsidian dipped in moonlight. Its tail coils high above its back, tip twitching as if it's listening to the air. You step back instinctively. Artemis doesn't move. This, she says calmly, is the other story. One version of Orion's end. The version she never liked says that Gaia, Earth herself, sent this scorpion to punish Orion for boasting he could kill all animals. A cosmic failsafe. Orion, stung and collapsing, calls to the gods for help. And Zeus, perhaps feeling guilty, immortalizes both him and the scorpion in the stars, forever locked in pursuit, rising and setting across the heavens. They say it was justice, Artemis murmurs. I say it was fear. You look at the creature. It's not attacking. Just circling her, slow and deliberate. Not predator, not prey. Just witness. What are you going to do, you whisper? She doesn't answer. Instead, she raises her bow. Not to shoot, just to signal readiness. The scorpion pauses, then coils tighter. Its tail drops low. And then it bows. Just for a moment. Then it slinks back into the earth, the fissure closing behind it like a secret sealed. Artemis lowers her bow. Somewhere above, the sun filters through the leaves in broken patterns, like a constellation trying to find its shape again. You walk back with her in silence. The nymphs don't ask where you went. They already know the signs. Artemis doesn't talk for the rest of the day. She carves a small scorpion shape into a tree trunk that night, placing it beside a simple arrow rune. Call it closure, or just a bookmark in a myth still being edited. Later, by the fire, a younger nymph hesitantly asks, "Is it true the stars only shine because gods get lonely?" Artemis doesn't look up. They shine because people keep looking. That's as close to a bedtime story as she gets. You glance up at the sky. Orion gleams just above the horizon, his belt sharp and defiant. Behind him, just out of reach, Scorpio rises too, glimmering patient. They never meet. The gods arranged it that way. Eternal separation. Cosmic choreography. Some say Artemis requested it herself. Historians still argue whether this was mercy or penance. Fringe thinkers suggest it was the first divine restraining order. You don't know what to believe? But that night, you fall asleep with the stars overhead and Artemis sitting quietly nearby, her fingers tracing the constellations like she's remembering how the sky used to feel before it got so crowded with regrets. You're somewhere above Thessaly now, on the shoulder of a mountain, so high that clouds brush past your ankles like sheep looking for their shepherd. Artemis stands on the edge of a cliff, peering out at the vast sweep of mortal life below. Villages blinking with torchlight, temples half built, and fields furrowed with tiny human hopes. She doesn't speak. She rarely does before the moonrise. The moment arrives quietly. A shimmer. A tug. The first crescent appears, thin as a smile not fully formed, and Artemis exhales. Then she runs. Not down the mountain. Upward. Impossibly toward the sky itself. You don't question it anymore. This is just what she does. Each night, as the moon takes its place in the heavens, Artemis begins her patrol. The modern mind thinks of her as a goddess of the moon, but it's more accurate to call her its guardian. Selene drives the chariot. Hecate governs the shadows. Artemis patrols the edges, walking the line between mortal sleep and divine watchfulness. She runs now, not to chase or flee, but to maintain. She passes over sleeping forests, rivers curled like silver snakes, and cities too noisy to notice her. Her footsteps never touch the earth, but the wind shifts with her presence. Dogs twitch in their dreams, owls pause mid-flight. Below, mortals sleep, and above, she watches. Sometimes, she stops to listen. A prayer from a child afraid of the dark. A whispered plea from a midwife at a bedside. Artemis hears them all. She doesn't always answer, but she hears. You drift alongside her, not flying, just floating in her wake. The stars are closer now, their light less magical and more like flickering memories. She points to one. That's Callisto, she says. She used to run with me until Zeus turned her into a bear. You raise an eyebrow, because she got pregnant, but Zeus. She nods. He was disguised as me. You wince. She fought him off. It didn't matter. There's no heat in her voice, just the flat chill of long-carried anger. Later, she gestures to another constellation. That's Arcus, her son. Almost killed her once, not knowing she was a bear. And then Zeus panicked. Threw them both into the sky. A fringe theory claims that Artemis made him do it. Forced his hand. Trapped him in guilt. Historians aren't sure, but those stars have hung in the sky for centuries, circling the North Pole in silence. Artemis touches a star as you pass it. They still run. Just differently now. Her nightly journey continues. Sometimes she races the moon, her feet barely skimming the atmosphere. Other nights, she walks beside it, whispering to it like an old friend too stubborn to sleep. One time, you spot a shooting star. You point, she squints. Dead satellite, she says, mortal trash. And somehow that makes it better. She stops over a quiet grove in Attica. Below, a girl kneels beside her sick dog, tears streaking her cheeks. Artemis watches, then lifts one hand and makes the tiniest motion. A glow, a breath, the dog sighs. Not cured, just comforted. It's enough. You move on. Some nights, she passes through clouds so thick they taste like cold bread. Other times, the sky is so clear it reflects every regret she's ever had. You ask her if she gets bored. No. Lonely. She pauses. Not anymore. Because of the nymphs? No, because I stopped wishing they could follow me up here. That hurts in a way you don't name. Eventually, the night ends. The moon sinks low, yawning behind the mountains. Artemis descends with it, her feet touching dew, covered grass once more. The nymphs stir in their sleep. Bristle lets out a particularly contented snore. She sits on a rock and begins unlacing her boots, her hair tangled with bits of night wind and comet dust. She says nothing. You ask, "What do you dream about?" She replies, running. But slower. You've returned to the lowlands now, where the air tastes like morning bread and bug spray hasn't been invented yet. Artemis walks ahead of you, hands loosely at her sides, eyes scanning the horizon like she's searching for the next place to not belong. You're not sure what's left for her to do, honestly. She's hunted legendary beasts, dodged divine family drama, invented emotional boundaries, and moonwalked across literal sky. And yet, she pauses near a group of mortals struggling to pitch a very primitive tent. It's a mess. One pole is broken, the ropes are tangled in knots only toddlers and fate can create, and someone is trying to hammer a wooden stake into stone. You expect Artemis to roll her eyes and vanish into the nearest tree. She doesn't. Instead, she walks over, kneels, and silently begins to fix it. She pulls the rope tight with the practiced efficiency of someone who's set up camps in lightning storms and on cliff edges. She replaces the rock with a softer patch of soil. She gestures, wordlessly, for one of them to hold the corner while she knots the loop. They stare in awe, but she doesn't acknowledge it. This isn't for them. This is for the tent. Later, you ask why. She shrugs. If you're gonna sleep outside, you may as well not do it badly. And just like that, you realize Artemis may not be the goddess of camping in title, but she is in function. Every teenager with a sleeping bag, every exhausted parent tying down a tarp in the rain, every friend group arguing over where to hang the food bag, they all channel her. Fringe anthropologists even suggest the rise of recreational camping in the modern world is low-key divine influence. A way for Artemis to sneak herself back into mortal memory, one leaky tent at a time. You start noticing her everywhere, in the friend who insists on just one more trail before sunset, in the kid who sleeps better in a hammock than in their own bed, in the person who collects pine cones, just in case. All of them unknowing devotees of the moonlit wilderness queen, and don't even get her started on trail mix. Back at camp, you find a nymph painstakingly organizing a bag of dried fruits, seeds, and mysterious crunchy things. Artemis says raisins are betrayal. She confides. You believe her. That evening, as the fire crackles and the smell of scorched rosemary drifts on the breeze, the nymphs share ghost stories. Not the spooky kind, these are weird, ancient, oddly specific. One swears she once saw a mortal turn into a mushroom out of sheer embarrassment. Another claims that Bristle is actually a curse prince who's just really into chewing bark now. Artemis doesn't deny any of it. Later, she teaches a group of younger nymphs how to set up a windproof linn to using only 3 sticks and a vine. You catch her adjusting a tarp for the 4th time just because it fluttered wrong. She denies this. You don't press it. You lie down beside the fire, wrapped in your cloak, listening to the quiet buzzes of forest life. Crickets chirp. A fox pads nearby. The stars flicker through the branches like they're winking. Artemis sits beside you, her gaze somewhere far away. You're good at this, you say. She tilts her head. Ate what? Making it feel safe. Out here. She nods once. That's the job. And maybe that's the legacy, more than any statue or prayer. Not just protecting maidens or punishing creeps. Not just cosmic jogging, but the art of making the wild feel like home. Of turning a patch of grass, some rope, and a fire into a sanctuary. That's what she leaves mortals. Not temples, but tents, not hymns. But hammocks, not thunderbolts. But the quiet knowledge that someone, somewhere, is watching from the tree line, not judging, not interfering, just making sure you tied your knots tight and kept the snacks away from beers. You fall asleep to the sound of Artemis whittling something nearby. Probably another tent stake. Probably not her last. The last stretch of your journey with Artemis begins as most days do. Dew on the grass, birds warming up their vocal cords, Bristle trying to chew something structurally important. But this morning feels different. Not dramatic, not divine, just final. Artemis walks slower now. Not from fatigue. Goddesses don't tire. Not really. But like someone reaching the last pages of a favorite book. The nymphs sense it too. They hum quieter songs, gather their things a little more reverently, and stop bickering about who stole whose moss pillow. You travel through a quieter part of the forest, where the trees are older and taller, and the air feels like it's been holding secrets for centuries. Artemis doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. This isn't a lesson or a mission. It's a letting go. She stops at a lake so still it reflects the sky perfectly, right down to the faintest clouds. You sit beside her, watching dragonflies zip across the surface like skipping stones. A gentle breeze ripples the water, distorting the reflection of the moon, now a pale ghost in the dawn light. This is where I began, she says quietly. Before temples, before names. You glance at her. She's not looking at the water. She's looking through it, into something you'll never quite see. Not because it's hidden, but because it was never meant for mortals to understand. There's a tree here, older than Olympus, bent but unbroken, with carvings from hands long forgotten. Artemis kneels beside it, presses her palm against the bark, and you swear the tree leans toward her, just slightly. She rises, dusts off her tunic, and smiles. Not the smug smile she uses when besting Apollo, or the cryptic one reserved for moonlit philosophies. This smile is soft, whole, the kind of smile that says, I've seen enough. I've done enough. I'll be here if you need me. The nymphs gather around. They form a loose circle, like they always do before a parting. Some hug her, some bow. One awkwardly hands her a pine cone. Artemis accepts each gesture with grace, even the pine cone. You ask what happens next. She lifts her bow and slings it over her shoulder. I go back to the trees. To the trails no one walks anymore. To the edges of maps. You nod. Of course she does. But I leave a bit behind, she adds. In every girl who runs barefoot. In every camper who finds peace beside a fire. In every story told in whispers under the stars. Then she leans close and says, and you. You'll tell them, won't you? You promise you will. And just like that, she's gone. No flash. No thunderclap. Just the soft crunch of footsteps fading into the woods. The nymphs begin to drift too, some melting into trees, others following animal paths into the underbrush. Bristle, naturally, lingers longest, making sure to knock over your backpack before disappearing. You sit there for a while, watching the lake, the sky, the empty space where a goddess once stood, and then you start walking, not away. Forward, you retrace your steps with new eyes. Every tree root is familiar now. Every star overhead carries a name. Every night you'll sleep outdoors, you'll feel her there, just past the firelight. Not haunting, just present. The wind picks up. The moon, now nearly gone, slips below the horizon, and you smile. Because you made it all the way through the wilderness, with Artemis. The night softens now, like moss under your fingertips. You feel it. How the forest sighs, how the stars blink slower, how your breath begins to match the rhythm of something much older than stories. The trail behind you fades, not lost, just resting. Artemis is no longer beside you, but she's everywhere now. Woven into the hush of pine trees, folded into the curl of smoke from forgotten campfires, pressed into the earth where bare feet once danced. Let the last embers glow. Let the cool air brush your cheek like a blessing. You're safe. You're still, and the wild will wait for you always. Sleep now. Let your dreams wander the same paths she walked. Let your heartbeat echo the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the faint pull of a bowstring drawn gently in the dark. Because even now, even here, somewhere in the deep hush of your resting mind, Artemis is watching, not guarding, just nearby, like moonlight on a quiet trail,